I'm Jason Klom, and this is the Comedy on Vinyl podcast. The year is 1974, the album, The Missing White House Tapes, the artist, The National Lampoon. My guest this week is Bill Oakley. Thank you so much for doing the show.
Hey, my pleasure. I'm excited to be here and talk about this classic National Lampoon album.
So we can do a very quick sort of, I mean, you were VP of the Harvard Lampoon. You obviously went to Harvard. What was your experience with the National Lampoon, and when did you first discover them?
You know, I'd say there's two different sets of experiences. The first was the experience I had as a kid when I transitioned from, like many people did in that era, when you become about 12 and you start to transition from reading Mad to reading National Lampoon.
Sure.
Again, this only applies to people who grew up in the 70s and early 80s.
Right.
But around the time that you start to reach puberty, you started to discover National Lampoon, which is a far more adult magazine than Mad. Very funny magazine. Certainly in the mid-70s, it was extremely high quality, tons of great graphics, comics, writing, photography, gags and crap like that. And then it was more. Also, it was dirtier. It was much more entertaining to a teenage boy than Mad, and so it also was very political. What happened was probably around the time I was 11. I started reading mainly National Lampoon, and I became totally obsessed with like their whole catalog, like buying the back issues, buying the records, and all that kind of stuff. And that's what led me to discover this album. Now, secondarily, when I was on the Harvard Lampoon in college, this was during the decline of National Lampoon's heyday. For those who don't remember, was probably like about 1970 to about 1981, maybe. And around the time I was in college, which was the late 80s, National Lampoon was already severe. And the Harvard Lampoon has a deal with the National Lampoon that, like, because it's a licensee of the Lampoon name, and it was founded by Harvard Lampoon people, that we kind of control their operations. And at a certain point, we were like, just please stop publishing the magazine. Like, you can keep the name for movies or whatever, but the magazine became such an embarrassment that the deal was just like, you can keep the name and continue to license it, but just don't publish the magazine anymore. And that was probably the mid 90s when that happened. So my relationship with National Lampoon effectively ended probably in the late 80s, when it became, I think obviously all the original people were long, long gone, and it became kind of a service to print reprints, and it only came out maybe once or twice a year anyway. So I'm talking obviously about when I speak about National Lampoon on this podcast, I mean the classic era.
Sure. No, that makes sense. So you discovered them just young enough. Do you know the first album? Were you listening from the I mean, you're probably too young to listen to them from the beginning, but I would imagine you would have grabbed them all at some point.
I think I had most of them.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't easy to find, but in the pre-internet era, like, you had to go to record stores, obviously, and you'd have to go to used record stores often to find things that weren't current. And there weren't a huge number of record stores in Washington, D.C., where I grew up, certainly that had like old weird stuff like this. So when I found one, I would snatch it up. And like, I had a fair number of them. I obviously had all the Animal House ones. I had what was their greatest hits one? That one with the gold with the painting on the front. What I'm talking?
I do know what you're talking about. I can pull it up. Let's see here.
I can't remember what it was called, but it was a lot of it was repackaged stuff from Radio Dinner. Radio Dinner was, I think, their most famous album. And then I'm pretty sure I had that, and I had this and one or two others. This is the one that for some reason sticks in my memory, and that's why I want to talk about it with you guys today.
And it's so funny because I don't think because I hadn't heard it before. It's one of those that I've owned but decided not to listen to until somebody picked it, so it would be pretty fresh in my mind. I wasn't expecting National Lampoon to be doing kind of cut-up jobs of tapes. I was not expecting that at all from them, although it's done very effectively.
Yeah, and I would be very curious to know who actually did that. Like, was that done by someone on the National Lampoon staff, or was it done by someone else? And like, hey, do you want to put the National Lampoon name on this? Like, the credits for the album are maddeningly hard to discern.
Right.
and and I mean the cut up tapes job, which I guess we'll get to talking about in a second, is pretty good. It doesn't seem like, I mean, it doesn't normally seem like a National Lampoon operation. It's side two that seems like a National Lampoon operation, but
Sure.
it was still a high quality thing, and it doesn't necessarily seem like their usual brand. I agree.
Right, and I guess I'm gonna have to do a little bit of digging. My assumption is that there's a chance that the two gentlemen credited as producers maybe had a hand in it, or like you say, I hadn't thought about that. It's possible that they got them elsewhere, and licensed them or something, or just bought them out. Um,
Yeah.
so for those who don't know, side one is that.
Well, let me tell you, this is also, I think there's a little context that probably, now that we're talking about something that happened 45 years, this is literally
Right.
45 years old, that is, that probably is lost to modern day history. Like, this was right at the time, this was right before Saturday Night Live. It was literally the apex of National Lampoon's famousness, and it had this whole fleet of famous comedians who were working for National Lampoon on their Broadway shows and their records, who were all just about to become hugely famous on Saturday Night Live, probably months after this record came out, or at least
Yeah.
like maybe a year. Like, this is like National Lampoon was literally the most happening thing in comedy from 1970 to 1974, at least in a certain type of comedy. Obviously, Richard Pryor was happening elsewhere and things like that, but National Lampoon magazine was the place to be, and it had a couple of different Broadway shows, the most famous of which was called Lemmings. And
Yes.
a lot of the actors, I believe, including Chevy Chase, Gildy Radner, John Belushi, who within years were to become hugely famous as the founding cast of Saturday Night Live, were in there. They were all found by the National Lampoon crowd. They were all part of the National Lampoon crowd, and they appeared on all these records. And this record, having come out, I assume this record probably came out in, I don't know, June, July 1974. They were probably already in the early stages of trying to put together Saturday Night Live, and this may have been one of the last albums where these, where Chevy Chase and John Belushi were available to do this kind of crazy
Right.
stuff
Yeah.
on a record before they became huge celebrities. And that also was covered. Everybody who hasn't seen that movie about Doug Kenny. Doug Kenny was one of the most important guys in comedy and one of the principal founder of National Lampoon. There was a movie on Netflix a year or two ago called A Futile and Stupid Gesture, which
Yeah.
was like a biopic of Doug Kenny. And it goes into a little bit of this. And I think there was justifiably some anger on the part of Doug Kenny and National Lampoon when Saturday Night Live just stole their whole thing,
Yeah.
stole all their actors and several of their writers right out from under them. And, thus bringing the most golden era of National Lampoon to a swift end in 1975.
Yeah, that we actually interviewed a couple of the gentlemen, the two gentlemen who wrote that movie, who wrote "Futile and Stupid Gesture," and it was fun because it was one of those things like, is this an assignment movie? But no, they had been fans of the Lampoon for a very long time, so thank goodness it was a project of passion. I quite enjoyed
Yeah,
that. I wasn't sure
that
if
was
I
great.
would because it's one of those movies that's clearly about a bunch of assholes who are just very funny and but fascinating.
Right.
You know, I want to know a little bit about.
I agree. Those guys are great.
I actually want to know a little bit. I always like to ask people about what it was like, working for the Harvard Lampoon. And if there's anything, I don't know, if you have a concept of how it might have been different from when it started. Well, not from when it started, but from the golden era, from when Doug Kenny was there.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, you mean working for National Lampoon, not the Harvard Lampoon, or either one?
Oh, I meant the Harvard
Which one are you
Lampoon
talking
first.
about?
I'm
They're
always
two different
interested in the
things.
Harvard Lampoon because fewer people talk about that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the Harvard Lampoon is a college club,
Yes.
and it only publishes the magazine. The Harvard Lampoon is really only distributed on the Harvard campus. Once in a while, it slips out to newsstands elsewhere.
Right.
Um, and it's a club. It's been around since 1876. It's the nation's oldest humor magazine. It's probably the world's second oldest humor magazine, I think, after maybe Punch or whatever, which
Yeah.
may have had some on and off times. Anyway, so the principal thing about the magazine and the club itself is that it has this beautiful castle, which is literally a small castle off Harvard Square, which was built in 1909 and financed mainly by William Randolph Hearst, who was a graduate of the Lampoon. And the fact that the Lampoon has this castle, which is architecturally significant, gives it a certain cachet that other undergraduate clubs that don't have castles don't have.
Mm-hmm.
So people want to know. It's probably what's kept the magazine alive at certain points. Is not only the real estate investment that the place has, but also this certain mystique. So over the years, there's been a whole bunch of, it was exclusively male until 1972, I guess, when Radcliffe merged with Harvard. But yeah, over the years, lots of famous comedians and comedy writers of a certain ilk, like Robert Benchley, and that George Plimpton, John Updike, also actors like Fred Gwynne, had been on the Lampoon, and the magazine was always kind of not was okay.
Hmm.
I mean, certainly it was fine for a college humor magazine. It was nothing. It was never all that great. There were certain periods when it became great due to the. But the thing is, the staff turns over every 3 years. Like
Sure.
there's no. The staff is just completely comprised of undergraduates. So every 3 years, it depends on what the crowd is. Some years there's a whole staff that just doesn't give a crap. It doesn't barely puts out the magazine at all. Other times there are people who live there and are dedicated to having the best time and putting out the funniest magazine possible. So
Yeah.
it varies from year to year. Anyway, in 67, 68, 69, Doug Kenny was there along with Henry Beard and Rob Hoffman, and those were the guys who founded National Lampoon.
Right.
And they got this license from the Harvard Lampoon to use that name. And also, the certain percentage of National Lampoon royalties went back to the Harvard Lampoon, which really kept it afloat for quite a long time with the Animal House royalties and National Lampoon Vacations and things like that. So that's what it is. Now, what was it like to work on the Lampoon? It was fun. I mean, I'd say it was a little bit like being on a fraternity without. It has some of the fraternity, some of the worst aspects of a fraternity, but also some of the aspects that a fraternity doesn't have. Like, it's not all about your social status. It's all about your. A lot of times, the people who are elected we've never met them.
Uh-huh.
It's only been based on their pieces, based on their comedy pieces and their and their artwork. And then they show up, and you're like, holy crap, this is the weirdest person I've ever met. And now he's part of our private club. And it definitely happened a number of times with people who are extremely weird. But it's a rare fraternity where you get both men and women of every race and every economic background that are selected purely from their comedy or artistic ability, or in some cases their ability to sell ads. And then they're all kind of like, they're wearing tuxedos and fancy formal dresses for the fraternity style parties that we have. So like, it's an interesting combination of those two types of things. And it's a big meritocracy, I would say, for the most part. And it's dedicated mainly to putting out the magazine, which is mostly, as I said, on the Harvard campus. But every year or so, the Lampoon also puts out a national publication, like a parody. Sometimes we would do, like, the most famous thing ever was the Lord of the Rings book. But
Yes.
sometimes that was in the 70s. But also, we would do parodies of, like, we had a parody of USA Today,
Yeah.
parody of a Harry Potter book, things like that. Or they did a parody of the Huffington Post website like 3 or 4 years ago. So that's the only national exposure the place has.
Right. Do you,
All right, that covered that.
No, it does.
Harvard.
It's good. I'm just always curious because they're bits and pieces. Obviously, you're never going to really get exposed to if you're not a part of it. I do know that also maybe around the time you were there, they released at least one flexi disc, if I'm not mistaken. They every once in a while would cut a little comedy
Yeah,
single.
I believe that was around 80 or 81.
Oh,
I think
okay,
Mike
it was a little
Reese and
before.
Al Jean, who you may have met, were involved in that, and maybe Patrick Verone was too.
It's quite possible. Yeah, I know that he mentioned it to me. We definitely discussed it. I'm curious about what this album means to you at all. You're very young when the Nixon stuff is happening. So, but it's obviously a part of it. It's in the air constantly. So, what does this album mean to you besides just being kind of really goofy when you're 12 or so?
That's one of the weird things about this, that I had not heard this album probably in 35 years since until you emailed it to me for this thing, and it really brings back a lot of memories. Like, this is I think part of what drew me to this album was just that there wasn't very much that was going on that was entertaining those days, so I would just get everything. Like, I think this album, I wouldn't say this is one of the National Lampoon's greatest works, but it has a certain emotional resonance for me, which is why I wanted to talk about it today. I think it was more just like an album by National Lampoon. I don't know what it is. It's fascinatingly weird. It's a relic of maybe like 9 years ago when people were talking about Watergate, and I sort of learned about Watergate from this. Like, I wasn't paying attention at all to Watergate when I was a little kid, when I was 8 years old when it happened.
Right.
I was probably listening to this album when I was like 15 and 16, which was 8 or 9 years after Watergate. So I didn't think I understood a lot of this stuff until yesterday when I revisited the album for the first time. And now, being a Watergate buff myself, I'm like, oh, that's what that was. And there's still one or two things in here that I was like, whoa, that's an obscure. I had to look up this whole thing with the ITT scandal and Nita Beard. I completely forgot. I think I may have heard about it once in my life, which is referenced several times on the album. And it's a weird thing. And the thing about this album that I think hopefully your listeners will appreciate when we discuss it is the incredible resonance it has for today, for our
Oh
political
yeah.
scene today, which is probably it's the most noteworthy aspect of it.
For sure. Yeah, I mean that was the thing that was occurring to me. I wrote an article a few months ago, sometime last year, and I guess I skipped this one over, which kind of upsets me. But I was writing specifically about albums that tried to take down Nixon, and that's a hyperbole version, but it's a bunch of satirical albums of Nixon because honestly, I don't think that there's no moment in pop culture or history that has had more comedy albums made about it other than Watergate and Nixon. And so it's
Right.
fascinating when
Yes.
somebody who was born then or was alive then or around then, it's fascinating which one they pick. Um, and so that's why I'm always interested. Like, well, what would have been your Nixon album? And this is one that I guess I missed when I was writing it, but it's kind of more my style, honestly, because I really like the cut up stuff. Frankly, I'm a child though.
Yeah. I like the sketches are pretty good too.
Yeah, they're great.
It's a pretty it's a B list effort for the
Yeah,
National Lampoon, but it's got an A list cast, and there's still some pretty funny stuff in here. And there's a number of things that I also will say, like, just a sidebar here. It's such a weird thing to remember the days when you would sit down and listen to a record, or you'd have a friend come over and you'd say, "Hey, come over and listen to this record with
yeah.
me." I can't imagine anybody doing that today. But this obviously happened between me and my writing partner, Josh Weinstein. Josh and I ran The Simpsons back in the day. We wrote all these scripts, and so we were also high school friends. I recall us listening to this album together several times and imitating stuff from it. And there's a number of things that I have heard here, like, "Oh yeah, we used to say that all the time." Mainly those, like, the Sam Irvin impressions that Chevy Chase was doing,
Uh
and
huh.
a couple other things like that. From that, one of the most memorable parts of that speech where Nixon says, people who disagree should be shouted down, even physically assaulted. I think we used to find that especially hilarious. So there is a lot of stuff in here that, for a brief period, was really like the meme that Josh and I shared, in high school. And it was this obscure comedy Nixon stuff.
I love that so much. Yeah, I always wonder when things like this are so much in your blood, if you can ever peg when you've turned them into something else. And usually it's not obvious. It's not like clearly, unless it's an explicit reference on something you've written. Is there anything that you can think of that's like that, or is it just in your blood?
I believe that this was partially responsible for turning both of us into Watergate buffs,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that, like, that this was fascinating. We were like, oh, this is, because we totally, as I said, we missed the Watergate boat with this. We were enjoying this 9 or 10 years after Watergate, but we enjoyed this album immensely. We also were fans of the National Lampoon from that era, so I think we got a lot of Watergate satire 8 or 9 years too late,
Mm-hmm.
and that caused us to become Watergate buffs. So that's why we've done stuff like the most famous Watergate thing we've done probably is the Sideshow Bob Roberts episode of The Simpsons,
Yeah.
which is a Watergate satire all the way from A to Z. And then we've done a number of other things with Watergate references in them, and even up to, my Twitter virtually every day, um, when I called Gordon Sondland the new Jeb Magruder, things like that nobody would care. Nobody
Yeah.
cares or knows what I'm talking about. But as a Watergate buff, this is probably one of the seminal items that helped turn me into that.
Is it? Do you have a concept of beyond this sort of spurring it, why it's consistently stuck with you? Is it just because you're aware that at some point it's probably going to come back / has come back, or is it just, and that's why it's important to you to keep talking about it? I'm just curious
No,
why
I
it's
don't
so
think that's what it
important.
was.
Okay,
I think I think it's the culture of I think, because Josh and I both grew up in Washington D.C. in the 70s
sure.
and 80s, and that our parents were heavily immersed in the political world in this era, and I think that, like, the the culture and time of that era of the in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s is particularly fascinating to us. And we continue to do stuff about it right now. I'm actually doing a huge thing for Amazon about this very thing, not Watergate, but a few years earlier.
Okay.
So it continues to be a era. Actually, the politics of it are very interesting, but I actually am very much interested in the whole culture of the time, and the thing, things like Nixon going out on his boat with his friends reading the help. I don't know. I'm fascinated by the by the weird non-political culture of the Nixon White House as well.
Okay. No, that's fair. I mean, I can see that being a huge part of just and why that would mean so much to the both of you. I love that you both shared it. See, because early on, and I still try and bring this up, one of the things about this show is I'm always curious about, hey, did you ever make friends over comedy? Or did you have somebody with whom you shared this record? Well, that's been made quite clear that a comedy partnership came out of this in some way.
Yeah,
That's remarkable
definitely.
to me. So, and it's something that you have quoted to each other. It's the most delightfully nerdy thing I've heard on the show in a while. I love that, and
Thank
it's
thank you.
it's a very positive thing. I like when comedy albums do that. Let's. I don't know if we don't have to do this track by track, but we can definitely talk about your favorite parts of this. I've already admitted I am a nerd for like cut up comedy. I mean, when I first learned to edit comedy, that's what I was doing. I think I was editing speeches or something like that, not knowing that that was a common thing that had been done. Also, actually, that'd be something. Did you ever make comedy yourselves? Like, did you ever record yourselves? Did you ever do anything like this?
Nothing like this. We did make comedy. I mean, we made probably comedy videos and we made fake radio shows and stuff briefly and things like that. Our comedy was mainly print comedy. The
Hmm.
thing that we did that I guess I'd say was our claim to fame, or at least was probably what got me admitted to Harvard to begin with, was we founded a humor magazine in high school, because I was obsessed with humor magazines, with National Lampoon in particular at that stage. And the one of the editors, the non-creative editors of National Lampoon, published a book about how to create a humor magazine.
Amazing.
And I basically just did it I followed it step by step at the school. I got people to pay for the magazine in advance, and Josh and I started this humor magazine that was pretty good. I would say that in retrospect was actually better than most college humor magazines in high school, and it was like 40 pages long, and it had comics and all sorts of stuff. It was really good. So,
Wow.
and I think that impressed the admissions officers at the time because it was an unusual achievement. So that's one thing that we did like that.
That's
I
remarkable.
wouldn't say that we didn't do a lot of comedy production. And this, I mean, just so I'm sure your listeners already know. When you say cut up comedy, what you mean is that they've edited various Nixon speeches to make them make them sound far more comical and incriminating than they actually were.
Yes,
That's what.
right. Sorry, there's a more common term for it, and I'm absolutely blanking on it. So that's why I just keep saying cut up. It's not the right term at all. Just for those who are
Uh,
going to correct me on it.
yeah, I'll say like these. It's hard for me. The tracks. There's 11 tracks. Let's see. There's 11 tracks on the first side of this album, all of which are edited pieces of Nixon's speeches, where they have made him sound like a dope or made him confess to a crime or whatever
Uh-huh.
by using his actual speeches, but edited cleverly together. Some of them are more effective than other ones, like that one where he's on the phone with. There's one where he's on the phone with John Mitchell, which seems to be edited Watergate phone calls, where it's really crap. Like the editing is really crappy. Everyone sounds like when you cut up sentences like this, sometimes it doesn't sound like the person is ending a sentence. It just sounds like it's hanging there in a
Uh-huh.
weird way, and that one is particularly crappy. There are a number of very good ones on here. Notably, in my opinion, the first one, which is the Checkers speech,
Hmm.
which is Nixon's classic Checkers speech from the 1906. Wait, no, I'm sorry, the 1952 election,
Hmm.
right? Or is it the 1956 election, where he went on TV and he said about the little dog that he'd gotten, but no matter what they say about it, we're going to keep it. And they edited this part to say, and in that, that the box, and in that box was just a little less than $10,000. And no matter what they say about it, we're going to keep it. Like that part, that made me laugh because that's it's perfectly edited. Um, let's see. Now there were a couple other ones on this that I thought, there's a few golden ones. Like I really like that one. I believe it's either the 10th or 11th track, which is the wrap up, which is the one I said where he basically sort of outlines the cut-up speech where Nixon basically outlines his philosophy about how the mechanisms of government should be used against the people. Those who disagree should be shouted down or even violently physically assaulted. That part, that makes me laugh. And that's a phrase that Josh and I said all the time, the physically assaulted thing. And there's like, they're playing that pomp and circumstance music underneath that. There's another really good one is that one that's supposed to be said at hearings, and he says a lot of crazy, incriminating things. It's pretty funny. Like in general, I think it's a solid effort. Like certainly by today's standards, it's pretty amateurish because, like today, you can audio edit things seamlessly.
Yeah.
These are obviously done probably on physical, actual, magnetic tape by hand, and it obviously was a hard job, and a lot of them don't hang together that well. But the ones that do are fairly seamless, like that Checker speech one, and they're pretty memorable.
Yeah.
Now again, also like, would anybody today give a shit about hearing these? I don't know. Like I'm kind of a Nixon buff, and I enjoyed hearing them because I like to hear Nixon. I mean, this is a good job. I like to hear Nixon talk, and I also like the nostalgia value of this. But it's a real period piece in terms of like, I don't know that anybody would be the slightest bit interested in this album side if they weren't already a Watergate buff with some knowledge of the underlying material.
You could be right. As a comedy nerd, I'm always interested in what people are doing to try and be funny and where they succeed and where they fail. So at least on that level, and I know we got a lot of people who listen for that, so it's worth listening to sort of gauge what you think works and what doesn't. It's funny because if you wrote these out as sketches, they don't work. That's not the joke. The whole joke is obviously, let's see how much we can take this man's actual words and make him sound, like he's admitting to the asshole he is. And so it's interesting because you can fail real hard because you have to get those edits just right in order for them to be they are just seamless.
Some are, and some of them are not. Like the ones from the telephone recordings, like the John Mitchell one, is super. There's lots of ones that hang there, and it's like, wait a minute, he was clearly in the middle of a sentence when that ended, and things like that. So some of them work better than others, and it's just a question of luck probably in terms of what intonation the speaker was using at that moment. Anyway, there's a couple. I would say out of the 11 tracks on this, there's at least 4 that are seamless enough to really, really be entertaining. And it's like, you're like, I mean, like you don't know what Nixon really said, and he probably didn't confess to a crime or say people should be physically assaulted, but it sure sounds like it. That's how perfectly it's put together.
Yeah. I think the first time, again, we're of a slightly different generation, but the first time I ever heard this done was in the movie Good Morning Vietnam. There's a ton of that where Robin Williams' characters cutting up specifically Nixon speeches and some other ones just to make them say terrible things about their genitals. Do you know the first time you ever heard anything like this? Was it this album?
It's got to have been this.
Yeah.
I don't recall anything other than that prior to this stage. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I know there's a weird, like I have some friends who have a passion for this exact kind of thing. And I'm going to have to ask them and get them to comment on it at some point because I'm curious how far back this goes. But it's like, it's so perfectly subversive. I mean, while the Nixon era didn't invent subversive humor, it is its own brand. Nixon's subversive humor is its own thing entirely.
Right. It should also be said that there's a wraparound on this side, which is B.B. Rebozo, which appears to be John Belushi, if I'm right, playing B.B. Rebozo. And B.B.
Right.
Rebozo, for those who don't know, was Nixon's closest friend, very wealthy businessman. And I don't think he sounded like this. I don't think he sounded like Mario. He sounds like Mario.
Yeah.
Like it's Belushi doing the corniest Italian impression. I don't think Rebozo was Italian even. Wasn't he Cuban? I don't know. But he's like, hey, I'm a B.B. Rebozo. We're going to sell you that. So it's basically like him being a pitchman we want to sell you these Watergate tapes. You can buy the collection for $19.99. And it's just a lot of real corny things where he's literally saying like, hey, abundan. He's saying like, hey, we're going to have a lasagna. We're going to have a pizza pie. Like, and it seems like it was mostly improvised.
Yeah.
It's funny to hear Belushi doing it though.
Yeah, I that's what I thought. I thought that was him. So who else? We've got John Belushi. We've got Chevy Chase. There are other names on here who I am not as familiar with.
Is it Rhonda Kool-Aid? Like,
yes.
Well, I actually thought it was Jane Curtin. But there's only 4 or 5 actors on this whole thing.
Right.
And okay, let's see. John Belushi, Chevy Chase, Rhonda Kool-Aid, and Tony Shuren. I don't know who Tony Shuren is. Rhonda Kool-Aid, I think, was on a lot of National Lampoon albums, but I don't know anything about her other than that. The only other two stars are Belushi and Chevy Chase, who seem to be doing almost all the um, characters on side two. And so I can tell you what stood out for me here. Like there was
Sure.
a number of this is a side of comedy sketches, and like they're pretty. They're I mean, they're, some of them are better than others. Some of them are real slow. Um, some of them are parodies of things nobody would know today. But like I would say again, it's not necessarily the National Lampoon's best work, but some of the things rise to the level of being funny.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
the wraparound is the impeachment day parade, which is it's like basically a parody of a parade broadcast with
Right.
two anchor people, one of whom is Chevy Chase, the other whom must be Rhonda Kool-Aid, talking about the parade. Like it's basically like the inaugural day parade, but it's in reverse, and there's parades and so forth, and then coming to the culminating with the swearing out, which I love that this is the second to last track on the album, which is the swearing out ceremony with Billy Graham, and that part where he goes like, "Richard Nixon, you lied your ass off, fuck off," at the end, which I recall being pretty shocking because it was like, whoa, that's Billy Graham, first of all, and also like he says "fuck off," which was pretty outrageous at the time, and I really liked that a lot. So that's another one of those things that we would quote was that Billy Graham swearing out of Richard Nixon. Um, there's another like Pennsylvania Avenue is a parody of Sesame Street,
Uh-huh.
where Nixon. There's a pretty funny kind of Nixon, like if you imagined a Richard Nixon Muppet voice, that it's pretty good. And then he's feeding the tapes to the Shredder monster, who's like the Cookie Monster, and then like there's other Sesame Street characters that are involved, about like in the search for the missing tapes. That's pretty funny. Um, let's see the plumber. There's so many dated things here, like the Josephine the plumber. Did you have any idea what the Josephine the plumber commercial was?
I had to just try and, from context, figure out approximately what it was doing, but no specifics.
Okay, there was a parody. There was in this. How is this? In the 60s and early 70s, there was a commercial for Comet Cleanser that was one of those really popular commercial series of commercials. You know how like who Mr. Whipple is with Charmin and
Sure,
all that
yeah, yeah.
stuff. Like, do you remember him? Uh, This is another one of those, and it didn't obviously people didn't remember it as didn't have the longevity of Mr. Whipple. Was Josephine the plumber, and it was a lady plumber, and everybody was like, they were amazed the fact that a lady plumber was coming to their house, and she was like, all you need is Comet Cleanser to clean out your sink or whatever the hell it was. So there's a whole parody of Josephine the lady plumber, but it's of course it's about the White House plumbers.
Hmm.
Like that one didn't really stand the test of time. Then there was that really slow one, like the Constitution game, which was like the search for the next person who could be president. Remember to that one? Do you know what I'm talking about? It was
uh
Carl Albert.
oh,
It was
yes, right.
another pretty deep. It was basically a parody of a game show with Carl Albert, who I think was the Speaker of the House at that time, looking for who in the line of succession is the next person who didn't have a criminal record in the Nixon administration, and they're down to like literally the deputy undersecretary of agriculture for soil affairs, and it turns out that he has taken some kickbacks from the soil company. So and the joke is like they have to go through 500 people to find anybody in the Nixon administration who's not crooked. Um, what else? Okay, the Senate hearings one. That's my favorite. Like it's so half-assed yet so funny. The
Uh-huh.
Senate hearings one, which is the eighth track on this thing, is when Chevy Chase. The primary joke is Chevy Chase doing an impression of Sam Irvin, and it's hard to state like how much of a comedy figure Sam Irvin was, and even I wasn't quite cognizant of what was going on in 1974. But like he is a big old he was the head of the hearings, and he was a big old Southern senator who literally sounded like Foghorn Leghorn,
Right.
and would even do that kind of same stutter, like I tell you, boy, I say. And so this whole track is basically just Chevy Chase constantly doing a Foghorn Leghorn impression and asking questions, but he's constantly getting the name wrong. He literally changes the name of the person testifying with every single sentence to a different Watergate conspirator. And then he says like Mr. Butterfield, he gets Alexander Butterfield's name mixed up, calls him Mr. Buttermilk, and then he keeps. And finally, at the end, he has this crazy breakdown where he can't say anything, and he just goes like, just answer the question, boy." And it's like you don't usually get to hear Chevy Chase doing kind of like a Foghorn Leghorn Southerny thing, so
No.
it's funny and it's so corny, but I really like that one. Um, the next track is another commercial parody from that era, which I believe was from Colgate, where there used to be this commercial where the kid would run like the parent was doing something. The joke was the parent was doing something important, like giving a press conference or I don't know, giving a presentation at work, and the kid would run in and say, "Daddy, Daddy, I only got two cavities, or I didn't get any cavities because I brushed with Colgate." And it was like, I don't know. The premise was that it was so exciting and so important that the kid didn't get any cavities that they could interrupt this business meeting. And in this case, it's a parody of a press conference at the Nixon White House with Ron Ziegler, and his kid runs in with this dental report, and then Ron Ziegler obfuscates it in the way that he always did, very much like the Sean Spicer or Sarah Huckabee Sanders, would
Uh-huh.
just totally unload this load of bullshit onto you about this dental report. Um, Finally, the one that I believe it was Mission Impeachment. There's a few other tracks that really spoke to me. One was I think it was Mission Impeachable,
Yeah.
which was the parody of the Mission Impossible tape.
Right.
Okay, that one was Chevy Chase. If you've ever seen the old Mission Impossible, it begins usually with Mr. Phelps getting a tape that says like, "Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to overthrow the embassy of so and so, and at stake is this and that, and you'll have at your disposal," like, and laying out the whole premise. Now this one was Chevy Chase parodying that tape and outlining what still is apparently the mission of the entire Republican Party. Like, like that one, I was like, whoa, this is the one I was like, this seems like it was written today,
Yeah.
because it's like the laundry list of goals of the Republican Party in this Mission Impeachable was like, to serve the interests of big business, to pack the Supreme Court with right wing morons and stuff like that. And I was like, oh shit, that's exactly. It really hasn't evolved at all. Like a lot of this stuff is extremely dated, and that's kind of why it's funny to me. But this one was like it was written today. It's extremely prescient, and it's weird because it seems like those of us who are not in the Republican Party, this sounds like a laundry list of their contemporary goals,
Yeah.
which is to enrich themselves, serve the interests of big business, pack the Supreme Court with right wing morons, and that one was when I was like, oh man, that's really prescient. So that one I liked. Then we follow that up with the swearing out, which was entertaining, as I said, when Billy Graham tells Nixon to fuck off, and then the Jerry Ford show. I was like, what the hell is this? Like, I don't think I even realized until yesterday that was supposed to be Jerry Ford.
Right.
Like, I was like, what? At the end, I think that because it's not a good impression of Jerry Ford, and I think it's Belushi doing it. I think it sounds nothing like him, and he's going little, and I don't think I because I was not looking at the album track listing. I guess when I listened to it in 1981, I didn't realize that was supposed to be a Jerry Ford impression. I thought it was more Sesame Street,
Right.
and so I was like, oh, that's Jerry Ford because he sounds like duh, and it's basically like a really half-assed parody of the Tonight Show with Jerry Ford going like, "We got a great show for you," and I think the thing about that is it sounds like a lot of this material was probably either improvised or made up on the spot. There's some more tightly scripted stuff that seems like people put a lot of hard work into it, but there's also a lot of kind of half-assed stuff which either doesn't hold up today or only is amusement. It's amusing, like that Chevy Chase thing, as like, this is so stupid it's hilarious.
Yeah.
With him, Chevy Chase and Irvin. So like it's a again, this is an album I wouldn't recommend people run out and search for this album if they want to be tickled pink. I think this is more of a time capsule of not only the Watergate era comedy, but also kind of the National Lampoon's more outrageous take on the Watergate scandal, and also a great time capsule of hearing Chevy Chase and Belushi before they got famous, when they were still willing to do stuff like a Foghorn Leghorn impression or a corny Bozo impression. And it's also like there's some real deep cuts in here still, even for me. Like, as a Watergate buff, I had to Google the whole thing about the ITT affair, which is referenced here at least 2 or 3 times. And I gather it was a pretty big scandal in '72, but has since been completely forgotten by modern America.
Right. I was kind of shocked that, because I think my first experience with the National Lampoon record was on this podcast, because it's not something I grew up with. Somebody told me to listen to That's Not Funny, It's Sick, and that is one of their filthiest, most legitimately vile albums. There's some really funny stuff on it, but like there's nothing really that like quote unquote edgy on this one, not in that way anyway. It's because it's more focused. I don't know.
Right. Well, those are like also the That's Not Funny, It's Sick and Radio Dinner are examples of, it's basically like the best of the National Lampoon Radio Hour.
Right.
Like they had the National Lampoon Radio Hour for many years, and that was like a serious job. Like the people writing that took it real seriously. And like when it's the best 8 sketches from the radio hour, you're like, these are 8 solid sketches. Like they've really worked hard on these.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this thing seems like a cash grab. It seems like a cash grab.
Yeah.
Everybody else was introducing Watergate albums in the summer of '74. So why don't we do it too? And we'll go to the studio for a day and a half and improvise part of it. Like maybe that wasn't the case here, but that's kind of what it seems like. And like it seems like they already had somebody else provided all those edited Nixon tapes for side one, and then they were like, let's get Belushi and Chevy in the studio. We'll fart around, we'll make up some stuff, and we'll have this record released pretty quick. I mean, that could easily be the story of this. Maybe I'm selling them short. Maybe they carefully scripted it over a period of months and had table reads, but I seriously doubt it.
It's interesting to go from the first family in 62, which is a lighthearted jab, but well-meaning jab, to 12 years later, how many albums, including this one, that were just like, no, everything is fucked. Let's just make sure everybody's aware the world's burning. And let's also, again, there are weird cash grabs like this. There are a bunch. There was like David Fry, because he could do an impression. Let's just release another Nixon album. And it's a weird time for comedy albums, but fascinating.
Definitely. I had a couple other ones too, which I have since misplaced, that were like, that were like a lot of like B and C list comedians coming out with their own Watergate album, just because everybody was doing it. And I think that this is to state the obvious here. Like there wasn't much of any comedy like this on TV in that era, or even really on the radio. Like that's why there were so many records, because the whole countercultural comedy, like there was no Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night Live kind of was the first TV thing to really adopt that kind of National Lampoon outlook.
Right.
Like Laugh-In did it a little bit, but Laugh-In was long gone by '74, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it wasn't, I'm sure that their jabs were pretty light in tone, because it was network television.
Yes.
So the only place really to get this kind of comedy was on record, or from stand-ups if you went to see one of Richard Pryor or something like that. But like that's probably why there were so many, because there was a market for it, there was an appetite for it, and you simply couldn't get it on TV. You weren't going to get it on the movies. You wouldn't get it on any radio stations except college radio. So like that, it was a weird pent up demand for kind of a satirical take that just the networks were very respectful of the administration,
right,
and big business in general and all that stuff until the late '70s.
Yeah, I mean, that's why the Smothers Brothers had so much damn trouble getting anything on the air half the time, was because of,
Absolutely.
The influence was upsetting. You've already, so towards the end, I normally like to ask why recommend this album. You've already said, listen to it or don't, but here's why. So you've already told us why. But you've also made a good argument for giving this a listen, at least if you've got access to it. I would say the same. There's some interesting stuff on it. It's hit or miss, but again, listening to early Belushi and Chevy Chase is definitely worth it as well. I wrote something down. So early on, do any copies of your magazine with Josh still exist? Are there any of those out there that are readable?
Our high school magazine?
Yeah, your high school humor magazine.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I mean, there some. There's probably some in the school library, but there's also, I'm sure each of us have at least 10 copies of each of the 2 issues. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm just saying those should be digitized.
Yes.
I so desperately want to read one now. Desperately want to.
You're not going to get a lot of laughs. Almost all of it was about internal school.
That's
the
great
people
though.
At the school and the teachers and stuff. So it's I don't think it would have a much mass appeal, but it was it was very, very high quality for the circumstances.
For sure. I really appreciate you doing this. I also appreciate the fact that you've written many, many things that have influenced me and have made me laugh over the years. So thank you for that. I want to, why don't you tell people where they can find you, what might be upcoming? This episode's going to come out next week, I believe. So.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I have all the things I'm working on are not going to be out for a long time.
Okay.
As I said, I'm doing something that deals with the politics of the late 1960s, but that will not be out until next year. So I'm not going to promote it now. The only thing that you can do is, if you guys, my hobby is reviewing fast food, and I do it on Instagram. And it's that Bill Oakley on Instagram. I make short, funny videos about fast food items, and they have it's kind of caught on over the time, and I've become a little bit of a fast food influencer, if such a thing exists. Over, I realize how stupid that sounds, but it's true. So if you have the slightest bit of interest in seeing what kind of short, funny things I do in my spare time, check out my Instagram at that Bill Oakley.
That's delightful. Well, when this next thing comes out, obviously you're welcome back anytime, but if you want to come back to promote it, would be happy to do so, because I'm sure it will be good, whatever it is.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for doing this again. Everybody, thank you guys for listening. I'll just say, visit my Instagram. Why not? At Jason Klamm, JASONKLAMM. Hashtag the professional blur. That's where you can see all my work as an extra. And I'm trying to do a podcast about it that will be coming out in a few weeks soon, about all my extra work and my friends' extra work. So there we go. Thank you guys for listening. And as always, have a good thing. Comedy on Vinyl is a production of StolenDress Entertainment. It is produced by Mike Worden and is hosted and edited by Jason Klamm. Our theme song was composed and performed by Richard Levinson. You can email us at podcast@comedyonvinyl.com. You can also send snail mail to StolenDress Entertainment, P.O. Box 805, Burbank, California, 91503. Subscribe to Comedy on Vinyl on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and anywhere else you can find podcasts. Give us a 5-star rating and write us a review. It helps. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Comedy on Vinyl, or find everything in one place at comedyonvinyl.com. A major portion of Comedy on Vinyl has been underwritten by Stand Up Records. Please visit standuprecords.com for all your comedy needs, and tune in to the new Stand Up Records channel available on the Roku, where you can also find select episodes of this podcast. Visit StolenDress.com to listen to our other podcasts, watch videos, and imbibe freely of our multimedia content going back 15 plus years. StolenDress Entertainment.
Hey, it's my turn.